Hello, everybody. Riot Mort here with Riot Statikk in the first of 3 videos to introduce you to TFT Reckoning. A lot to go over today. This will probably be the most boring of the 3 videos, but definitely an important one to go over. This is system changes, and so I'm joined by Statikk, who helped do a lot of these changes, right?
Yeah, I mean, some of them I was just involved in. Some of them I've led, and I'm not gonna call these ones boring, but you know what? Maybe they are.
Nice. So, like I said, hopefully you're watching these in order. This is the first of the 3. The second one is the shadow items, which is the set mechanic of Reckoning, and the third is the traits and champions. So check those out. It's a lot of content. Maybe watch it at 1.5x, 1.75x, or you do you. But yeah, let's jump into it and talk about this. This is airing on Tuesday morning, so PBE later today. Exciting as hell.
Ooh,
I know,
spicy.
I know. All right, let's jump into it. First thing to talk about is the unit system change, the unit movement. So there's a slight improvement to the unit AI. You want to walk us through this one?
Yeah, I mean, we did a change in the last set actually to make the combat's more consistent of how enemies would engage each other, specifically melee versus melee, but it caused our characters to kind of move in a really jittery and weird kind of way and just felt really unnatural. So this set, we've basically spent some time to work on the code that actually is behind all these kind of like targeting AIs. And so the big main point is that the targets will basically reevaluate their current target if they get 1 hex away from their current range. I don't know if there's a better way to explain that more, but go for it if you got
No,
it.
I mean, basically, if you notice anything weird, let us know. But generally, it should be an improvement to their AI and hopefully make it feel a little better as they move around, is the TLDR of it.
Yeah, yeah.
Cool. Mono generation. Interestingly enough, we tried a lot of stuff, and we ended up with a very minor change for now. The change here is that 6% of damage pre-mitigation was how it used to work. And what this meant was if you put a lot of tanky items on a character, they became much, much more efficient at generating mana. So what we've changed it to is it's now 3% pre-mitigation and 5% post-mitigation. So generally what this means is a character on the front line who's taking damage is probably going to get a little bit more mana if they have no items or no tanky traits than they would have before. But as soon as you start really stacking them, they're going to get less mana than they would have before. It's still better to stack them with tankiness, but it's not quite as exponentially good as it was before.
Yeah, I think this has just been a really tricky space for us overall. Like, mana generation from taking damage does a lot of good things, but also does a lot of bad things or weird things. And we've had to deal with like the weird incentives of do we want to make the items, defensive items good at helping you generate mana or not? And this is kind of a step a little bit back from that and being like, okay, you can stack defensive items, but it's not going to become so good with
Yep.
the system. Still gonna be really good. So
Yeah, no more Sejuani's casting 4 times because you put Bramble Dragonclaw Stoneplate, you know.
in before someone does that this set. Okay.
No, now they'll do it through healing though. So,
Oh yeah, that's true for sure.
all right. Next slide. This one's got a cute little GIF because I think this is great. A new shop card glow has been added if you own at least 1 copy of a champion. This could be on the bench, this could be on the board, but basically, if you own a copy of a champion, there's a very slight glow that's like, hey, if you wanted it, buy this. This we think is going to help a lot of newer players. It should help with some roll downs. Some of you may struggle with this a little bit if you're one of those people that like bought every 5 cost on the roll down. It may become a little distracting. But overall, we think this is a really good improvement to the game, especially for widening the audience. So I'm really happy with this. And frankly, since we've added it, every time I go back to live, I miss it.
Yeah, it's one of those changes where like I don't even remember what point during our testing this went in, but like it's become pretty second nature now to me for to look for those little like flashing things, and you don't appreciate it really on like the most basic level, but it does really help a lot. And so hopefully this just makes our game a little bit just more polished and a little bit easier to play. So
Nice. All right. Round timers. This is one I threw in. Generally, the goal here is to try to take out some of the dead time where there really was just no interesting decision making going on, and just try to get our average game time down just a little bit by pulling out from some spaces that didn't matter. So for example, the opening carousel will open 2 seconds quicker, and you'll have 2 seconds less to grab your item, but most of the time it was people standing around for 6 seconds anyway. The first stage starts after 6 seconds instead of 12. 1-3, where there was very little decision making, starts at 15 seconds instead of 20. PvE rounds, the transition where all the mobs appear, takes 2 seconds less. And all carousels, this is probably the riskiest of the bunch. All the carousels you have, instead of 8 seconds, 6 seconds to grab your thing before the next person is let out. So carousels will speed up just a little bit, but again, overall trying to get some dead time out of the game.
Yeah, I think this is like particularly important, and I'm sure we'll talk about it in some of the future videos, is with the armory system coming in. There's some times where we actually need to add some time into the game, and so if we didn't take any out, then games would just get even longer and longer. So I think this was really clever, and hopefully it works out.
Yep. All right, speaking of the carousel, a couple changes. Overall, and we talked about this in the learnings article, we ended up really happy with where the carousel ended up in Fates. So we're just nudging a few things a little bit here. If you haven't realized it by now, the way it works is stage 2 and 4 carousels are kind of the predictable carousels, where there's in Fates, it was a 95% chance of seeing one of every item. We've actually upped that to 98%. So 98% chance of seeing one of every item. The chance of a spatula went up from 15% to 22%. But the crazy 3 spatula plus random items one, as I think they call it, the Mortdog carousel, has been reduced from 5% to 2%. We still like these carousels. We still like them happening, but just a little less often and a few less games where there's like 2 or 3 of them in the same game. And the total spatula odds means that went up from 20% to 24%. We do want to see a few more spatulas this set with how many cool traits there are in the set. And then the stage 3 carousel was kind of the wacky, unpredictable one, where before there used to be a 50% chance of it literally just being random components. So if you ever had that game where there were 7 cloaks in 2 tiers, it was because you hit the 9 random, and that's what random rolled. So we're reducing the random from 50% to 33%, and increasing that back into the one of all, so a lot more standard carousels. And then again, the 3 spats plus random items drops from 5% to 2%. So,
yeah, it's pretty funny. I think we literally played a game today where like we got some pretty rare rolls on like 3 spats. So something it was really interesting to see that. So I think this is going to add a little bit more variance to the game. But I think carousels are actually some of the most like skill expressive moments in the game. And so even though there's like a sense of randomness, that choice is so key. Being able to know what you need to pick up to either like turn your loss streak around, or just build for a strong late game combination is like, it's all those skills are still going to be here despite us messing around with these percentages here and there a little bit. But also because it's a new set, I want y'all to keep trolling more about nudging, because nudges
exactly. No, I think there's still variance in carousel. It's just a little less, and so hopefully it won't be quite as wacky as Fates was sometimes. So. All right, item changes. This is where a lot of our stuff breaks down here. The first biggest one here is that just generally we've deflated the base power of items. So all the items got a slight nerf. Why don't you talk about this one?
Yeah, I mean, on the high level, we were looking for ways to kind of slow down the just power progression and combat pace that we were seeing happening over the past couple sets. You're seeing a lot of late games where you should talk about Fates, Asol just like exploding characters with just one spell really quickly at the start of a fight, among other tons of big carries like that. And so this is just a small way to chip some of the power out of the system, and we thought it was just an easy way to take some of the power out. So we nerfed basically every component just by it's a significant amount based on their base value, but components were not particularly powerful in the first place. So one thing to keep in mind is these stat nerfs do transfer over to the completed items as well. So the completed items are losing about 2 times worth of these stats. And the second thing to note is for sparring gloves, it's a weird item because sometimes it transfers over its crit or its dodge. So that's kind of like variable based on the item. You'll see we've had to make some calls on like should it lose its crit or dodge or how much dodge and how much crit. It's a little bit of a doozy there, but that's about it. Yeah.
Now I think the common question is why was Tyr not nerfed?
Yeah, I actually had Tyr nerfed, and honestly, it just made the item kind of feel really pointless. Like it almost kind of already feels a little pointless to put onto a unit when I was talking about like not trying to complete an item, just like putting it on in like an early fight or something. Like it could kind of matter, but going down to 10 just made it feel like it really didn't. And it took away some of the cool combinations, I think, of just like when you have 2 different tier items, you can get that 30 breakpoint on mana to get 3 auto attacks ahead. So I don't know. I just kind of decided not to. But if it happens to be overpowered, I'm sure we could revisit.
Cool. Makes sense. Okay, so yep, base components nerfed. Let's talk about some of the item changes that are going into the game. So Bloodthirster, and I saw some confusion around this because a lot of the preview articles actually mislabeled this. It still has the lifesteal. That's still a part of it now. But now it also has this sort of protective shield, and this is not the same shield as Gunblade, where Gunblade generates if it overheals. This is literally a life-saving shield, where if you fall below 40% health, it goes, no, never mind, shield. So it's kind of a lifesaver.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of inspired by similar League of Legends items like Sterex Gauge and stuff like that, where a shield comes up when you get low on health. And the main reason why I even decided to put this on there was BT's just struggled in general to be a solid item. Like it can kind of work on a couple characters here and there, but its only main use cases across the last couple sets has been maybe Darkstar Shaco as one of them. Yeah. I just can't really think of a lot in the most recent times. So it felt like, we needed to figure out another way to give it some power that wasn't necessarily just cranking that lifesteal up, because that lifesteal gets pretty wacky pretty fast. Yeah. So this is kind of like an idea is like, the base Bloodthirster gives you the sustain so you can win a long fight, but now you have a little bit of insurance policy against big burst. It's not as good as GA in this department per se, but it does something. And so, it's basically just a little bit more of a flexible item. And, sometimes you just put it on a tank and they just have, 40% more health sometimes in some fights, so.
What I like about this item is it creates a situation like Draven, we'll use as a pretty example. If he drops down below 40% health, he gains the shield. Then while the shield is deteriorating, you can get some attacks in and get that life back, and there's actually a nice clear window where to get some lifesteal effect in. So that feels pretty good.
Yeah, and I had toyed around with some like offensive versions of new bonus effects, and it just kind of felt weird. Like once you started itemizing Bloodthirster as like a carry type item in terms of like, hey, let me multiply my damage like an IE, it got really weird. So I think we ended in a pretty cool spot.
Yep, cool. Frozen Heart. This is an item I think a lot of people were expecting to get an adjustment. But I think a lot of people were probably expecting a much larger adjustment, like a complete overhaul or a rework. But instead, we ended up just kind of lowering the attack speed, but increasing the radius, and now it's unique, so you can't even stack them. What was the thought here?
I mean, to be frank with you, I really wish we had found a better replacement for this item for tier armor. But yeah, we tried a bunch of stuff and it just didn't really work. At some point, we kind of pulled in a weak version of Eternal Winter, and it was insane. It just ruined every playtest it was in. So yeah, I just ended up doing something that was a bit more simple, trying to make Frozen Heart a little bit more usable by giving it a bigger hex radius, but just making it a little bit weaker. I think it's definitely probably more powerful on average for sure, but I don't think whether this stays in the game for the long term is still a big question mark for me. I think if we found a good replacement for these components that made a lot of sense, I'm sure we would change it in a heartbeat. And that was a heartbeat. You get that, Mort? I just didn't accident. Whoops. But yeah, I think the problem with Frozen Heart, just as like a design kind of exercise here, it just doesn't really have any interesting synergies. Like, sure, you put it on characters who are like in melee, but that's about it. It doesn't really care about the stats of your character. It doesn't really care much about the enemies' stat profiles. It's just not that interesting in a combinatoric of an item, and I think that's where it falls short. So hopefully this just makes it more usable and not a dead item for the next foreseeable future. Maybe we update it on a patch up ahead, maybe in the mid set. We don't really know yet.
Makes sense. I've at least found it easier to use with like a Diana, for example. Jump in the back line, and it's still pretty valuable now with the 2 hex radius. A lot easier to use. But yeah, like you said, we'll see. So cool. Giant Slayer. This one's just a slight nerf. I'm the one who threw this in, especially because it's the only item now that is percent damage amp, which is multiplicative with all of our other damage amps, which kind of makes it inherently the most powerful item in a way. Thankfully, it's still very niche because you still have to have a 1750 health target. But take this, multiply it by spell crit, multiply it by spell damage, and it can get extremely multiplicative. So we just lowered its maximum output from 80% to 70% to reduce that. And you'll see anything else that had a percent damage amp has been changed, which we'll talk about in a bit.
Yeah, and I think we'll just dive a little bit into here. It's just you'll see a theme in some of the subset of item changes we did, which was to kind of get rid of the percent damage amp stat from items in general. And we left it on Giant Slayer in particular just because there wasn't really a better answer in this case. I think Giant Slayer does what it does, and it's cool in that, but it's definitely a dangerous stat that we've learned to, over time, a percent damage amp and how it interacts with our crit system and our other stat systems. Becomes very multiplicative and very powerful in the right circumstances with the right item combinations. And you were seeing a lot of that with Fates, where you put like a Hodge on a Aurelion Soul, and all of a sudden he's one-shotting all sorts of things, even though you're like, wait, this guy doesn't, all he has is a Hodge, man. What does this make any sense? And I think so we'll see ahead us ripping those damage amps out. In Giant Slayer's case, we're just reducing that and trying to keep damage amps mainly in the trait space. And that's kind of how we want to handle it moving forward, and we'll have to see how it plays out.
Yep. Speaking of which, Hand of Justice. You'll notice it went from 40% damage amp to 40 AD and AP. So a bit different, a little less multiplicative when it rolls that damage side. But if you're a champion that benefits from both of these stats, which technically every champion does to some extent, but if you can use both these stats really well, this can actually be a pretty much premier item. So it can feel pretty good for that.
Yeah, Hand of Justice is I think this is one that Mort pitched to me at first, and I was like, man, it's such a cool item right now. It's so flexible. You can kind of put it on tons of people, and it makes it really fun and really easy to use, and kind of glues a lot of our game together in a way in the last set. But honestly, this ends up being really similar. I mean, I know the math behind it is different, but you end up using it in very similar spots. And I think there's a little bit more fun now with, because ability power affects each champion differently. You kind of get a little bit of a difference per champion you put it on. I still use it and slam it in the same situations, but maybe I'm just dumb at this point.
Yeah, we'll have to see if it gets optimized differently. Cool. Okay, this is a big one. Archangels Staff, Ludens. We tried many things with Ludens. It basically could never get past its I'm only a blue buff character user problem. So now we have a brand new item, which is Archangels Staff, which is each time the wearer casts their ability, they gain ability power equal to 35% of their max mana. So for example, if I have this on Katarina, who has a 20 mana pool, she will gain 7 mana? 7 spell power?
7 AP, yeah.
Sweet.
Yeah.
And if I have this on Tarek, every time he casts a spell, he will gain 70 spell power because he has a 200 mana pool. So basically what this is you can risk it on how often they cast, but the more they cast, the stronger they get.
Yeah, and you can kind of cheat it a little bit because obviously our starting mana is kind of, sometimes characters have high starting mana and they can kind of get to their first cast fast, and that means if you can get to your second cast after that, it'd be quite powerful. But going back to Ludens, yeah, I mean, it's a cool item in terms of the visual impact and the kind of transformative nature it has on the champions it works on really well. I think Nami was a big hit. I think Brand had some fun things in the last part of Fates there, but it just ended up being way too niche, needing you to have both a short mana, a low mana spell, and then also basically being able to snowball the early game because the damage never really scaled, right? It kind of just was this number, and we've tried a ton of different things to make it work and it just never worked. So hopefully this is a much more flexible item, so that these components can feel more, flexible in general. I think that's one of the things that I try to strive for a lot in the item system is I never really want anyone to feel like they got trapped with these items and they have nothing they can do with it. And I think this kind of, a lot of people are calling it the Ginsu's of casters, basically the new Ginsu's Rageblade for casters. Hopefully it just opens up a lot more openers and different times you can slam these components and not feel so terrible about it. So
Yeah, I think this item is in a good way the most dangerous item we're releasing because there's probably a bunch of really cool tricks to it we just haven't even fully discovered yet. The way it interacts with Shojins, for example, so it's like use Shojins to accelerate casts, but then still get mana to do more casts. The fact that it's tied to the mana pool leads to some really creative solutions. Like I mentioned, Taric is an interesting example because getting Taric to cast a second time with that extra 70 spell power like can start to be pretty crazy, and that's not even taking into account like the shadow item system. So there's some pretty cool stuff here, but I really like the theming with the tier. It really is like cast a bunch, get a bunch of power. I think this is a really elegant, simple item, so looking forward to it. Nice. All right, RFC. RFC was a nightmare of an item, let's be honest, in Fates. It was like it turned Zed from useless to a god. It turned Akali from okay to insane. And it just made like certain characters like Kale just really good. That 2 hex increase, especially for melee champions, was big. It was really, really big. And a bit too transformative because it made it so that we had to balance around them having that item, which meant when they didn't have that item, they couldn't be anywhere near as good as they should have been. So we've lowered the hex range back to 1. But if we just did that, the item would kind of suck. It wouldn't be very good. So to compensate, it gets an extra 20% bonus attack speed. So you can see here the components normally would only add up to 20, but the rapid fire cannon says 40 on there. So you get a little bit extra attack speed. This should just make it sort of the general attack speed item. It shouldn't turn melee into like these massive, stay far away things. It should just be a healthier iteration of the item.
Yeah, that's the hope. I know Mort and I definitely are kind of on different sides of this, or maybe we're on the same side, but are both just hesitant in different ways about how this might play out. I think I love the attack range increase. It's one of like the actual things that made me really excited about TFT. Like I remember playing for the first time and I was like, oh my god, I can't wait to like increase the range of this character, even though it's like completely not important to do that at all. And so I think keeping it in the game is really good. But like Mort said, there's a lot of game health reasons we kind of needed to move away from the 100% attack range, or was it 200% attack range increase for so many reasons. And this is hopefully a much more controlled version of Rapid Fire Cannon that has honestly more general use cases. Like if you just slap it on a character, you just need some attack speed. It's just better than it used to be for those characters. But I think when it comes to melee carries and trying to turn, melee carries into range carries, it's going to be less good at that. You're going to have to be a lot more creative about how you position. If you have a melee carry, you have to kind of just figure out where on that second line you might want to put them. You can't just like stuff them away into a corner and then they become like a an incredible range carry. And that's something that I think is going to be positive for the game. Though you might miss it. I can understand players who feel like I loved doing that, but it just was not working out for us.
Yeah, this is a good example of like game development because, like I said, there's a part of me that wants to take the coward's approach and remove this item from the game. But like you said, there's another part of me that respects the fun it creates. And so we'll see how this plays out, but I definitely think this is a healthier version for sure. All right, Redemption. This is another item that got a really big rework. Now, Redemption wasn't a bad item before. It was just very hard to use and very hard to appreciate. So we're making it into a very different item that, frankly, I think is insanely strong. But the way this one works is the wearer radiates an aura within 1 hex, healing them for 30% of their missing health every 5 seconds. Not max health, missing health. Which isn't a ton of healing. But if you want to group up, it can be pretty good. But where I think it's really strong is also those affected allies take 40% reduced damage from area of effect attacks, which there are a lot of. So saying, hey group, we heal up and take 40% less damage from most AoE spells, pretty damn good.
Yeah, and I think if we had released this item with like keepers being in the game, or Revel might be a little over the top. And I'll say off the bat, this is probably the item that I think we have the poorest power read on as a team, and I think as even the public who have seen this item are completely on one side or the other, like this looks broken or this looks completely useless. And I think it's one of those ones we're gonna have to see how it plays out. Going back to what Mort said, the main motivation overall of why we wanted to work on Redemption is just because it was actually quite a powerful item. And I think at the near the end of every set, it's always, players realizing, oh wait, this item's really strong. Maybe I should use it. And it uses two items that are kind of like, sometimes less popular and less flexible. But the main problem I found with Redemption was that it didn't have a really clear purpose within a composition. Sure, you got some healing, but it never was really like a way for you to kind of find a way out, a losing game into a winning game. And I think this is kind of trying to give it a bit more of a purpose. So I was kind of inspired a lot by, previous casters of the past, like Set 3 Gangplank, Aurelion Soul from Fates, Ari from Fates. When they were strong, there was really not a lot of answers to them. They just kind of one-shot your board, and you just kind of had to live with it. So the idea of this item among a bunch of other flexible use cases would be like, hey, I'm going to like hide my carries in a corner with this Redemption, and hopefully they can survive that one-shot burst with this thing active and heal back up from it. And then, if they get a second cast off, maybe you live, maybe you don't. Hopefully you kill them before that cast or something like that. So that's kind of the idea behind this. I think it's a much more flexible item. You could slam this in early game and actually does a lot of work because those fights get really sloggy, and like chipping down that last 20% health is actually pretty hard when they keep procking Redemption heals. So it's hard for me to say how powerful it is exactly, but I'm hoping we put enough things in there that we can tune to make it the right thing for the game. So
agree. And then Spear of Shojin. This one got a buff. It went from 5 mana to 8 mana. But there's a really big catch here, and one of the reasons why we're able to buff it. It is not an on-hit anymore. It is an on-attack, meaning you can't do Hurricane Shojin anymore. That is gone, unfortunately. Sharpshooters, if they were to exist, or any other trait that did any on-hits, wouldn't exist. It is literally every time you auto-attack, gain 8 mana. So because we now have that lever in place, we can buff this up to 8 mana, and getting 80% mana gain is quite good. So
yeah, I mean, like, it was Spear of Shojin was definitely kind of caged by Sharpshooter in the last set, and that's unfortunately it was like hard to tune it because it was just like, oh well, if we got too high, then it was just way too strong with the Sharpshooters, and then Jinx from the first half of Fates would just be perma-stunning, or Nidalee in the second half would have just been like chucking spears every 2 attacks or something. So this is just a much more controlled version of it, and I think, lucky for us, Spear of Shojin is a simple but like pretty satisfying item. Like, it's just like generating more mana feels really good, and you can really feel it. And especially now that we've been able to buff it from 5 to 8, like that's a big jump. That's a pretty big jump in just basic effectiveness. So I think it's going to definitely be a much more popular item. If you get these 2 items on your opener, like, you should be pretty happy to slam it, honestly, if you know who you're going to be playing it on. So
yeah, there's a lot of creative uses this time as well. We already talked about Archangels. That's a good use. The fact that you can put it on somebody who has like a Morello or a Shadow Morello because you don't care about the damage. Like, there's a bunch of really cool uses, so I expect this item to be seen quite a bit. All right, Static Shiv. This one got a lot of changes, actually, again, although it still ends up being very similar. So it's still every 3rd attack, you unleash the lightning. The damage has been reduced, but you no longer need it to crit to reduce their magic resist by 70%. So this means this is just a now very consistent, very good magic resist shred item, which means it's actually pretty good in, like, a mage or now a spellweaver comp or an invoker comp. It's also really good in rangers because rangers will just lower the magic resist and proc this very often. So this item has actually been pretty powerful in our playtests.
Yeah, I think this was. I think we promised y'all last time. It was like I guess I did, which is I wanted to try something pretty wacky with the last Shiv iteration. Having a crit is pretty exciting, as something that I remember doing on League that was cool. But ended up just complicating the item, and even though it was much more balanced, like, it was better, better balanced throughout the game in terms of it wasn't overpowered early game and actually was like relevant late game. It ended up just still being a very awkward item where it's like, I need a specific items like IE with it. I need it on a specific champion that actually is going to use the MR shred. So kind of just went back to basics on this one. I was just like, hey, let's just give Shiv a really clear purpose in our game, which is it's the MR shred item. Just the same way Last Whisper is the armor shred item, this is the MR shred item. And whether you're going to run it on a mage type composition, I guess a spellweaver type composition in this new set, or just as like a random attack speed item that is doing this kind of secondary shred effect. hopefully that it's just a much more flexible item that you can use in multiple different ways, and just feels like a more solid item that you don't have to be worried again about, like, oh my god, I started with bow and tier. I guess I'm not. Do I build a Shiv? Like, yes or no? Like, this should be more like, all right, sweet, I got a Shiv, let's do it.
Yeah. A really cool combo with this is like you put this on your Ashe in your Draconic comp, so that your Ashe can apply the magic resist shred, and then her spell and Zyra's spell end up doing quite a bit more damage. So you get cool little combos like that. All right, Titan's Resolve. This is another one just like Hand of Justice, pretty simple. Instead of 2% damage amp per stack, it's just 2% AD and spell power. So kind of everything we said for Hand of Justice applies to Titan's Resolve. Should be interesting, should still be good on similar champions that you want to make tanky, but also do extra damage. So it's still Titan's Resolve.
Yeah, I got nothing to add. We've talked about it already, just getting damage amps out of the item system, and hopefully, in our playtests, we've still seen it be exactly usable on people we expect it to be. So, if it's weak or whatever, I'm sure we can tune it to get to the right point. But Titan's Resolve.
All right. And then the last one, and this one's a biggie, though the image doesn't show it here because it wasn't on the tooltip yet. I hope we got it in today because it'll go to PB tomorrow. But Zephyr now goes through Quicksilver and other CC immunity. So if you're thinking, I've got this cool backline champion with Shadow Quicksilver that's immune to all CC and I'll never have to reposition again, think again, because Zephyr now can hit these things. We wanted Zephyr to not just have this one answer counter. We like the Zephyr positioning game. It's a very cool skill expression. And so we wanted to make sure that exists. And so it goes through Quicksilver.
Yeah, and I think to give a little bit more context, I think like we've always been back and forth on whether Zephyr should be countered by QS and effects like that or not. And I think the kind of straw that breaks the camel's back for us is in Reckoning, you'll see that there's a trait called Verdant, and Verdant applies a QS like effect to a bunch of champions on the screen. And it just felt so bad playing as a Zephyr, as the player with a Zephyr, and like running into this comp, and you're just like, well, what do I do? Like, I had to like hit the one unit who might not have a spell shield on them. Was kind of impossible. And at the end of the day, Zephyr is such a awesome skill expressive item, and like if you can't outposition the one Zephyr like with your QS character, like, I mean, you just got outplayed in my opinion. So having those moments and the skill expression still be there, I think is good. And so this is the change we made.
Yep. All right, the following items are now unique. Trap Claw. So no more 15-second stuns with 3 Trap Claws. That's not a thing anymore. Sunfire Cape. Kent's experiment of stacking Sunfire Capes didn't really pan out, so we're going back to that being unique. Guardian Angel, which, yes, for some reason was not unique, and you could res with 800 health, which was never the play. We've decided to make sure that's not the play. And Frozen Heart, with its new value, having 2 of them count for 4 hexes, probably a little too powerful to hit the whole board with a 35% attack speed slow, or in the Shadow case, a 50%. So these are all now unique. And one of the other main reasons for doing this, besides just it's better for these items, is that the rule for Shadow items in these is if they're unique, you can't stack them. So you can't stack Blue Buff and Shadow Blue Buff. You can't stack Guardian Angel and Shadow Guardian Angel. That uniqueness is spread between the two. So we're hoping that helps with clarity here.
Yeah, for sure. And I think like in certain cases with like Trap Claw and Guardian Angel, I think a lot of players would come into the game and thinking, hey, if I put 2 Trap Claws, like I get to block 2 spells, right? Yeah. But instead the stacking was like way not as good, where it was like, oh, we just stunned them longer, which is like, it's something, but it's not worth an entire item slot, that's for sure. Yep. And I think GA was really similar, just like people might think, oh, I get to res twice, right? But really it was just like res with more health, and that's just not really worth it. So we just figured, why don't just remove these traps from the game, and also it'll help clean up a lot of interactions with the shadow items that you guys will be seeing in a future video, I think. So.
Yep. Cool. All right, so that is it, and I think the surprise that a lot of players will ask is like, wait, there's not more? You didn't lower the level 9 gold or change the rolling odds now that Chosen are gone? Or any of the player damage, all of that staying the same. Why are we keeping that the same, you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think we finally got to the point where we kind of understand where those systems are going to be. I know for the first couple sets it was really like turbulent, but that's probably because we didn't really know where we wanted it to lie and what was the right numbers. But I think with this many sets under our belt, we're starting to get a lot more comfortable with where they're at. And at the end of the day, we don't want to change everything at the same time, right? So much is changing in this new set with Reckoning. You're getting a lot more item combinations. You're getting, all these crazy traits, all these new spatulas, and it's just like a lot to take in. We don't really want to change all these other things behind the scenes at the same time and confuse everybody even more. So the more we keep the same and still have the game working at exactly the way we want it, great. And if we have to revisit this at some point because of something we missed, we're happy to do that. But right now we didn't see a clear reason to pursue any of those changes. So
Cool. So that is it for system changes. This will be the shortest of the 3 videos. But hopefully you see sort of why foundationally we change these things so that the shadow items and traits and champions can lean into these. So Statikk, anything you want to say to everybody as they get ready for PBE today?
No, I mean, this is the first video y'all get to see. I know people have already probably read all the bunch of I guess they're official leaks at this point, but just be really excited. There's a lot of new stuff, and there's a lot of stuff that we don't even understand fully what it's going to be, and I think that's part of the roller coaster of these sets. Is where we're right there with y'all, and we're just excited to see what happens. So.
Exactly. All right. Well, thanks for tuning in. This is video 1 of 3. The next one is shadow items, so definitely take a look at that. On behalf of the whole team, holy crap, we're excited for PBE today as well. Should be fun. Can't wait to see you on there. And yeah, good luck with Reckoning, and until next time, take it easy.